New Maid saw everyone ignore the CEO's autistic daughter until she asked her to dance with me. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The chandeliers glowed like molten gold above the ballroom, their warm light spilling across polished floors and rows of perfectly dressed guests. Conversations overlapped softly, champagne flutes clinked, and a string quartet played a gentle waltz in the corner. Everything felt grand, elegant, controlled. Yet in the center of that well-orchestrated elegance stood one small girl in a pale pink dress, clutching her hands together as if the world was too loud to touch. She could not have been more than 3 years old. Her eyes stayed low, never quite meeting anyone's face. Every time a guest passed by, they offered the same polite smile, followed by the same quiet distance. A step away, averted eyes, a subtle shift to avoid engagement. She was there, but invisible. Across the room, the new maid paused mid-stride, her tray still balanced on one hand. She noticed the girl long before she noticed the reactions around her. Something about the child's tiny shoulders, curled slightly inward, reminded her of memories she kept locked away. Memories of someone she once protected with everything she had. Memories of a world that had not been kind. She set the tray aside and slowly knelt, lowering herself until she was right at the girl's level. The music swelled around them, but in that moment it felt as if silence settled like snow. The child's fingers tapped against her dress in a steady pattern, seeking something familiar, something safe. The maid offered the gentlest smile she could muster. "Hey there," she whispered, her voice barely rising above the music. "Are you all right?" The girl did not speak. She simply looked at the floor, breathing in short, careful bursts. The maid noticed how the child's shoes shifted with the rhythm of the waltz. A tiny sway, a tiny step, an instinctive movement toward the music, as if her body recognized something her words could not express. So the maid extended her hand. Open, steady, patient. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the girl's small hand lifted, slowly, hesitantly, and brushed against hers. Her voice was soft, almost air, but it carried farther than any orchestra in that ballroom. "Dance with me." Across the room, a tall man in a gray suit froze completely. He had been locked in conversation with a circle of executives, but the sound of his daughter's voice, her rare, precious voice, pulled him like a tide. His expression changed from surprise to something deeper, something raw. The guests turned, whispering among themselves, unsure what they were witnessing. But the maid did not see them. She only saw the little girl squeezing her fingers, seeking grounding, seeking trust, seeking someone who would not pull away. "Of course I will," the maid whispered. "Let us take one small step. Just one." She guided the child into the light, not as entertainment for the crowd, not as a spectacle, but as a promise. A promise that she would not turn away. Not like the others. Not ever. The girl's tiny feet followed hers, awkward at first, then with growing confidence, as the two of them swayed gently to the music. No formal dance steps. Just movement. Just connection. And from the far end of the ballroom, the CEO watched with a stillness that was almost reverent, because for the first time in months, his daughter looked calm, present, safe. He whispered to himself, barely audible over the waltz. How did she do that? The music faded into a softer melody as the maid gently guided the little girl back toward a quieter corner of the ballroom. The guests slowly returned to their conversations, though many stole curious glances at the unusual sight they had just witnessed. But the maid barely noticed them. Her heart was still beating a little too fast, not from embarrassment, but from something deeper, something that felt like déjà vu. Because just minutes earlier, when she saw the child standing alone in the middle of the grand room, it had pulled her back to years she rarely let herself revisit. Years when she spent afternoons teaching her younger brother how to recognize colors, how to breathe through overwhelming moments, how to feel safe in a world that did not understand him. A world that often ignored him, the same way these adults had just ignored the little girl. She steadied her breath and brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Tonight was only her first week on the job. She needed the income. She needed the stability. And she needed to stay professional. This position paid more than any job she had ever had, and she had promised herself that she would not risk it. Still, watching the child cling to her hand, she knew she would have stepped in no matter what the consequences were. A soft voice broke her thoughts. "Excuse me." The maid looked up to find the CEO, standing just a few steps away. Up close, he looked different from the distant figure in the ballroom. His eyes held an alertness, a focus sharpened by responsibility, and something that resembled exhaustion. He was a man used to control, used to predictability, yet right now he seemed genuinely at a loss. He glanced down at his daughter, who was still holding the maid's fingers, her breathing steady and her posture relaxed. "She usually does not approach anyone," he said quietly. "Most nights, she cannot stay in a room this loud without becoming overwhelmed." The maid nodded. "She is sensitive to too much stimulation, but she responds well to rhythm and patterns." She motioned gently toward the girl's small tapping fingers. "She taps in counts of 4. That is grounding for her." The CEO blinked, as if surprised that a stranger noticed what he had never put into words. "You understand her," he said. "I understand a little," the maid replied, keeping her tone soft. "Enough to know she did not need distance tonight. She needed someone to come down to her level." The CEO exhaled slowly, almost gratefully. But then another emotion flitted across his expression, something like doubt, something like fear. He lowered his voice. "She has been through a lot this year. There are moments when I feel like I am failing her, like I am not giving her what she needs." The maid shook her head gently. "She feels safe with you. I can see that." He looked at his daughter again, watching how the girl leaned her cheek against the maid's hand for a fleeting second before stepping behind her, peeking out shyly from the folds of her apron. The maid smiled. She trusts quickly when she senses kindness. Children like her have instincts that adults sometimes forget. For a moment, they simply stood there, the three of them forming a quiet island away from the crowd. Then an older woman in a deep emerald gown approached, her expression polite but sharp around the edges. She looked the maid up and down, then forced a smile toward the CEO. "There you are," she said. "We were wondering why you stepped away. The investors are waiting." Her gaze flickered toward the maid, and the tone behind her next words hollowed slightly. "I see the staff is keeping the child busy." The little girl lifted her hands to her ears at the unfamiliar tone. The maid reacted immediately, stepping subtly between the woman and the child. The CEO noticed. "Thank you," he said quietly to the maid, his eyes lingering on her with a depth she did not expect. "I will come find you later. I want to understand what you did and how you did it." He offered a small, grateful nod before following the woman back toward the circle of executives. When he disappeared into the crowd, the maid looked down at the little girl who was still clutching her apron. She knelt again. "You did so well," she whispered. "Are you tired?" The girl gave a tiny nod. "All right, let us step outside the ballroom where it is quieter. You will feel better." As she guided the child toward the hallway, toward the soft glow of wall sconces and away from the overwhelming chatter, she thought about something she had never dared to hope for. This job was supposed to be temporary, a way to get back on her feet. But now, for the first time since she arrived at the mansion, she wondered if fate had placed her here for a reason standing right beside her, holding her hand with quiet trust. The next morning, the mansion felt completely different from the glittering ballroom of the night before. The chandeliers were silent now, and the hallways were filled only with soft morning light and the quiet hum of daily routines beginning. The maid arrived early, her uniform crisp and her hair neatly tied back. She was still thinking about the little girl's hand wrapped around hers, and the way the child had calmed the moment she stepped away from. The noise. Those moments stayed with her through the night. She checked the schedule pinned on the kitchen board and saw her name assigned to the morning shift near the child's playroom. Her breath caught for a moment. Was this temporary, or had the CEO purposely placed her there after what happened? When she reached the playroom door, she paused. She could hear faint tapping from inside. A rhythm, a pattern of force. Familiar. She knocked gently. "May I come in?" There was no verbal answer, but the tapping stopped. She slowly pushed the door open. The child was sitting on the rug, surrounded by wooden blocks arranged in precise color sequences. She did not look up, but she was not distressed. Her hands were moving with purpose. "Good morning," the maid said softly. "I am happy to see you." The child tapped 2 fingers against her knee. A greeting. The maid recognized it instantly. She set her cleaning supplies aside and crouched at a respectful distance. I remember your pattern, she whispered. 1, 2, 3, 4. The girl paused, then tapped the floor 4 times in response. A tiny breakthrough. A seed planted. The maid gently reached into her apron and took out a small set of colored pencils she had brought from home. She placed them in a straight line on the rug, making sure the spacing was consistent and predictable. I thought we could try drawing today, she said. Only if you want to. The child's eyes shifted, not quite meeting hers, but focusing on the pencils. She picked up one, the green one, then placed it down, then picked it up again. Her breathing steadied. Her shoulders relaxed. The maid did not rush her. She let the moment unfold at the child's pace. Minutes passed quietly, and finally, the girl moved the pencil across the paper. Just one line. A straight, simple stroke. That is beautiful, the maid whispered. You did that. The girl touched her own drawing with the back of her fingers, as if confirming it existed. When the maid glanced toward the doorway, she saw the CO, standing there silently. He had one hand braced on the doorframe, his expression soft but stunned. He had clearly been watching for longer than she realized. She never draws in front of anyone, he said in a low, almost reverent voice. The maid stood slowly. She chose the moment. All I did was make it easier for her. He stepped into the room, careful not to disrupt the quiet balance between them. His daughter did not recoil at his presence. She simply continued tracing tiny lines on the page. The CEO's voice was gentle when he spoke again. I want to understand what you are doing. What makes her respond this way? The maid hesitated, choosing her words with care. Children like her often need patterns, routines, and predictable transitions, she explained. When they feel safe, they explore. When they feel understood, they try. And when someone matches their pace, they trust. He listened intently, as if each sentence were something he had been searching for. The maid continued. Yesterday, I noticed she liked rhythm. So today, I gave her another pattern. Something she could control. And she responded to that. The CEO swallowed, emotion flickering across his face. You make it sound simple, he said. It is not simple, she replied. But it is possible. He nodded, his gaze drifting to his daughter again. I want her to have more days like this. The maid smiled gently. Then we can build something consistent. A small routine. Something that belongs only to her. As she spoke, she began organizing a few sensory toys and textures into neat groups. Soft fabric, smooth stones, wooden shapes. Each item placed carefully, thoughtfully, intentionally. The girl looked at the new arrangement and touched each item with a slow, curious certainty. Another seed planted. For the first time, the CEO exhaled with relief rather than fear. So this is what she needs, he said quietly. The maid nodded. This is where healing begins. And as the girl tapped her rhythm again, 4 soft taps against the rug, the maid matched her rhythm with 4 gentle taps of her own. A silent exchange. A forming bond. A daily routine taking shape, one small moment at a time. The seeds of healing had been planted, and none of them yet realized how far those seeds would grow. The following days settled into a gentle rhythm inside the mansion. Every morning, the maid arrived before sunrise, stepping quietly through the hallways while the world outside was still waking up. She had begun keeping small notes in a pocket notebook, recording what colors the child responded to, what sounds made her calm, and what moments caused her to retreat. Not for work requirements, not because anyone had asked, but because she wanted to understand the little girl completely. By the 3rd day, something remarkable began to happen. When the maid opened the playroom door, the child was waiting for her. Not sitting in the corner, not hiding under the table, but standing in the middle of the rug with her colored pencils lined up in a perfect row, each one spaced exactly the same distance apart. The maid smiled warmly. Good morning. Did you set these up? The child tapped her knee twice. A yes. The maid placed her hand over her heart. I love it. You did a wonderful job. The girl's shoulders relaxed as if those words were a soft blanket. The maid sat down beside her, waiting for the child to make the first move. The child picked up 2 pencils and placed one in the maid's hand, mirroring what she did. A simple exchange. A simple invitation. They drew side by side, each stroke slow and careful. The room felt peaceful, like the quiet moments before dawn when the world has not yet decided to be loud. Then the child did something she had not done before. She reached out and touched the back of the maid's hand. Not pulling, not tapping, simply resting her fingers lightly as if asking for reassurance. The maid whispered, "I am here." The child drew another line, straighter this time. A small breakthrough. A small step forward. When the maid looked up, she noticed the CEO, standing once again in the doorway, watching them with an expression she had seen only once before, on the night of the gala, when his daughter had spoken to her for the first time. He stepped into the room slowly. "She touched your hand," he said softly. "Yes," the maid replied. "It means she feels safe." He let out a long breath, one that sounded as if he had been holding it for months. "I cannot remember the last time she reached for someone." The maid's voice remained calm. "She is learning to trust again, but it will take time." He nodded. "Whatever it takes." A moment of silence passed, warm and steady. Then the girl placed one of her drawings into her father's hands. It was nothing more than a few colored lines and a small circle, but the CEO held it, as if she had handed him a priceless artifact. "She made this?" he asked. The maid nodded. "For you." He swallowed hard. "Thank you. Both of you." The maid stood quietly while he knelt beside his daughter, his tall frame folding carefully so he would not overwhelm her. He spoke gently, almost whispering, and for the first time, the girl looked at him, not a full gaze, not direct eye contact, but a brief, soft glance toward his face. It lasted only a second, but it was enough to make the CEO's eyes shine. Later that afternoon, the maid prepared a small sensory path on the floor, using soft fabrics, foam squares, and gentle textures. It was designed to help the child learn comfort through touch. She demonstrated each step slowly. The girl watched, hesitant. "You can try," the maid said. "Only if you want to." The child stepped forward, testing the first square with her toes. She paused, then stepped again, her breathing steady, her movements curious. "She is exploring," the maid whispered. "This is very good." The CEO watched from behind, pressing a hand to his mouth in awe. "She has never done anything like this before." "She just needed a space where she is not rushed," the maid replied. "A space where someone listens to what she cannot say." The girl reached the last square, stopped, and then turned back toward them. She lifted her arms, not toward her father, not toward the room, but toward the maid. A request, a silent question, a need for comfort. The maid knelt, offering a gentle embrace without pulling the child close. The girl leaned into her for a single quiet moment. It was delicate, fragile, and beautiful. The CEO placed a hand over his heart, as if something inside him had cracked open and finally breathed. He whispered, "I did not think I would ever see her do that again." And the maid, still holding the child, responded softly, "She is finding her way back, one small moment at a time." As the afternoon light filtered through the tall windows, casting soft gold across the room, the maid knew something had changed. The child was blooming. The routine was working. And the seeds of healing, planted quietly in the early days, were beginning to grow. None of them, not even the CEO watching with new hope in his eyes, realized just how much farther this transformation would go. The progress of the last few days felt almost unreal. Every morning, the girl greeted the maid with her quiet tapping rhythm. Every afternoon, she attempted something new. A new texture, a new sound, a new line on paper. And every evening, the CEO watched from a distance with a sense of gratitude he could not put into words. But healing never moves in a straight line. It always tests the people who dare to believe in it. On the fifth morning, when the maid entered the playroom with a gentle smile and a fresh set of sensory cards, she immediately sensed something was wrong. The girl was not waiting for her. She was curled under the table, her hands pressed firmly over her ears. Her breath was quick and uneven. Her shoulders were tight with fear. The maid crouched down slowly. "It is all right. I am here." The child squeezed her eyes shut as if she needed the world to disappear. The maid looked around the room and noticed small disruptions. Items moved, toys rearranged, colors shuffled out of order. Someone had been there. Someone who did not understand how easily the child could be thrown off balance. A quiet voice behind her confirmed it. "She was with me earlier." The maid turned. It was the same woman from the gala, the CEO's relative, dressed impeccably in a deep sapphire blouse. Her expression was not cruel, but it carried an air of superiority, the kind that often disguised itself as concern. "I thought I would spend some time with her," the woman continued. "But she refused to cooperate." She would not even look at me. So I tried reorganizing this place. It was a mess. The maid felt the breath tighten in her chest. A mess, she repeated calmly. Yes, the woman said. Everything was too repetitive, too controlled. Children need stimulation. They need to be taught how to deal with the real world. The maid swallowed her frustration. She kept her voice soft. Children like her do not thrive on uncontrolled stimulation. Changing her environment suddenly can overwhelm her. The woman rolled her eyes. Or maybe she is just spoiled. Your methods are very unconventional. I am not convinced you should be spending this much time with her. The maid did not answer. She focused only on the child. She slid her hand. Under the table, palm open. It is safe. Nothing will move unless you want it to. The child peeked up through trembling fingers. Her breathing slowed when she saw the maid's familiar presence. Slowly, inch by inch, she crawled toward her and pressed her forehead lightly against the maid's arm. The maid whispered, "You did so well. You handled something very hard." Right then, footsteps approached. The CEO entered the room, stopping short as he took in the scene. The overturned routine, the scattered toys, the trembling child in the maid's arms. "What happened?" he asked, his voice tight. The older woman placed a hand on her hip. "I was trying to help. This girl is becoming too attached to the staff. It is not healthy. She needs discipline, not this overly gentle approach." The CEO's face hardened, not with anger, but with the quiet intensity of a father who had spent months trying to keep his daughter safe. "Attached," he repeated. "She is finally communicating. She is calmer. She is smiling. That is not unhealthy. She needs structure," the woman insisted. "And she has that," he replied firmly. "For the first time in a long time, she has that." The maid looked up, surprised by the steady conviction in his voice. The CEO turned toward her. "Please stay with her. She needs stability." The woman scoffed. "You are letting a maid dictate how your daughter should be raised?" He met her gaze squarely. "I am listening to the one person she is responding to. That is what matters." The room went quiet. The girl, still shaken, reached into the maid's apron and found the ribbon bracelet she had made. She held it tightly, as if to reassure herself that the world was not falling apart. The maid touched the girl's hand gently. "You are all right. We will fix the room. We will put everything back where it belongs." The CEO exhaled slowly, relief blending with something deeper, something that looked like respect. "I am sorry," he whispered to the maid. "This should not have happened." The maid shook her head. "Setbacks happen. It is part of the process." She stood and began restoring the room, one item at a time, carefully returning each color and texture to its proper place. The girl followed her movements, calming with each familiar pattern restored. A few minutes later, the child tapped 4 times on the rug. The maid tapped back 4 times. Balance returned. A small victory reclaimed. A reminder that healing is fragile, but it survives when people fight for it. The CEO watched silently, a new understanding settling in his eyes. This was no longer just a job for her, and this was no longer just hope for him. It was the beginning of something far more important than either of them had expected. The rest of the day unfolded gently, as if the house itself was trying to make up for the morning's disruption. After the room was restored to its familiar order, the girl's breathing settled. She sat close to the maid, drawing slow, careful patterns across the page, each line steadier than the last. By evening, the mansion had grown quiet, the echo of footsteps fading as staff completed their duties. The maid finished cleaning up the playroom and carried a basket of blankets toward the laundry room. She expected the usual stillness there, but when she entered the hallway, she found the CEO standing near the window, his sleeves rolled up and his tie loosened. He looked tired, not from work, but from worry. The kind of worry that clings to a parent who never feels certain he is doing enough. He turned when he heard her steps. "Is she settled now?" "Yes," the maid answered. "She is resting." It took a while, but she found her rhythm again. A breath of relief left his chest, soft and uneven. "Thank you. I know I say that a lot, but I do not know how else to express it." "You do not have to thank me," she replied. "I am here because I care, and she is stronger than people realize." He nodded slowly, as if letting her words sink deeper than he expected. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hallway was filled with the faint hum of the evening air system, the distant clink of dishes being washed, and the soft glow of a single wall sconce reflecting off the polished floor. Then the CEO spoke again, his voice quieter. Today scared me, he admitted. Seeing her fall back into panic like that. I thought we were losing the progress she made. The maid held the folded blankets against her chest. Setbacks do not erase progress. They are part of healing. They simply show us where she still needs consistency. He leaned against the window frame, his shoulders lowering, the weight of months of pressure slowly loosening. I used to think I needed to fix everything. That being her father meant I had to be strong all the time. You are strong, the maid said, her tone gentle. But strength can look different from what you imagine. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it is simply staying. He looked at her then, not with authority, not with formality, but with the soft vulnerability of someone finally being honest. You stay, he said, even when things are hard. Even when she cries or shuts down or refuses to look at anyone. You stay. I stay because she deserves someone who will, the maid answered. And because I know what it feels like when the world misunderstands someone you love. He tilted his head slightly. Someone you love? She froze for a second, realizing what she had just revealed. My younger brother, she said softly. He struggled for years. People treated him like he was difficult when all he needed was someone who would meet him where he was. The CEO's voice lowered. Is he all right now? She smiled faintly. Yes. He is older now. He works at a small repair shop. He is good with patterns and machines. He just needed time. And understanding. The CEO absorbed every word carefully. Your brother was lucky to have you, he said. And your daughter is lucky to have you. She replied without hesitation. You are trying. You are learning her. That matters more than anything. The man looked away briefly, his eyes glistening under the warm hallway light. Not tears, just the softness of someone who had been carrying worry alone for too long. He cleared his throat gently. I do not know how you manage all of this with such patience. It is not patience, the maid said. It is recognizing the small victories. Like today, when she held the ribbon bracelet again. That was her way of grounding herself. The CEO's eyes lingered on her with quiet gratitude. I would not have understood that on my own. She shifted the blankets in her hands. You are learning. That is what matters. A peaceful silence fell between them, comfortable, almost warm. Something unspoken passed through the air. Not romance, not yet, but a deep recognition. A shared understanding built from worry, hope, and the fragile miracle of watching a child slowly return to herself. Would you? He hesitated, searching for the right words. Would you mind writing down the things she responds well to? The routines you think help her? I want to learn. I want to be part of this. The maid nodded immediately. I can do that. We can make a daily plan for her. He exhaled with relief, as if someone had handed him a compass after months of wandering without one. Thank you, he said again, softer this time. You are helping her. But you are helping me too. The maid lowered her gaze for a moment, touched by the sincerity in his voice. And as she walked toward the laundry room, the CEO watched her go with a look that held something new, something steady, something hopeful. The house was quiet, but inside those quiet moments, something meaningful was beginning to take shape. The next morning began quietly, almost too quietly. The maid walked through the mansion with her usual calm steps, carrying the new routine chart she and the CEO had discussed the night before. She felt hopeful. For the first time since she arrived, the house felt steady, as if everyone inside it was finally breathing at the same rhythm. But she should have known that peace inside a wealthy household rarely lasts long. When she reached the playroom, the door was already half open. She froze. She could hear voices. One was familiar. One was sharp. The older woman, the CEO's relative, stood inside with two other family members, their expensive perfumes filling the room like a fog. They looked at the charts on the wall, the carefully arranged textures, the drawings, the sensory path. And they were not pleased. This is ridiculous, the woman snapped. Look at all of this. So much time and attention wasted on childish activities. Another relative sighed dramatically. I spoke with the board yesterday. They believe she might be encouraging dependency. We cannot let a maid control how this child is raised. The maid exhaled slowly, reminding herself not to react. She stepped into the room. I did not expect anyone else to be here this morning, she said. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward her. The older woman folded her arms. We needed to evaluate what has been happening behind the scenes. It looks like you have been given far too much. Freedom. The maid kept her tone calm. Everything in this room has helped her daughter regain confidence and stability. You saw what happened yesterday when the environment was disrupted. The child needs discipline, the older woman replied. Not coddling. She cannot hide behind playtime forever. The maid shook her head. This is not coddling. This is therapy, structure, sensory support. She is learning through these routines. Another woman scoffed. You are not a therapist. No, the maid answered gently. But I understand her. And she responds to me. That is exactly the problem, the older woman snapped. She is becoming attached to you. When you leave, everything will collapse. It is dangerous to let her rely so heavily on someone who is temporary. The maid felt those words hit her harder than she expected. Temporary. Before she could speak, a small sound came from the corner of the room. The child was standing behind the curtain, her hands trembling, her tapping uneven. She had heard everything. The maid moved toward her carefully, but the older woman stepped forward. This is what happens when she is pushed, she said. You are not helping her. You are making her fragile. The maid took a slow breath. She is not fragile. She is overwhelmed. And she needs calm, not criticism. The older woman raised her voice. She needs a real environment, not this fantasy you have created around her. The maid crouched beside the curtain. Come here, she whispered to the little girl. You are all right. But the child hesitated, confused, overstimulated. And that was the exact moment the CEO walked in. He stopped dead in the doorway, looking at the cluster of relatives, the frightened child, and the maid kneeling beside her. What is going on? He demanded. The older woman lifted her chin. We are addressing a serious issue. This girl, she pointed at the maid, is overstepping. She is making your daughter dependent on her. She is interfering with family matters. The CEO's jaw tightened. Interfering? She has done more for my daughter in a week than anyone in this family has done in months. The woman scoffed. You are blinded by gratitude. I am paying attention, he corrected sharply. Something none of you have done. The tension thickened. The family members stared at him in disbelief. You are defending her? The older woman asked. Yes, he said without hesitation. I am. The maid slowly stood. Sir, it is all right. They are worried. They are not worried, he replied. They are controlling. And they are wrong. The little girl stepped out from behind the curtain, her eyes shiny with confusion. She reached for the maid and held onto her apron tightly. That single gesture silenced the room. The older woman pointed at the child. Look at that. She is clinging to her like she is her mother. It is unhealthy. The maid felt the room tilt. Those words carried both accusation and danger. She spoke softly, but firmly. She is not replacing anyone. She is connecting. She is learning to trust. That is not unhealthy. The CEO placed a protective hand on his daughter's shoulder. You will not speak about her like that again. And you will not enter this room without my permission. The relatives exchanged shocked looks. This is unacceptable, one whispered. You are letting a maid dictate your household. No, he said. I am trusting the person who shows up for my child. The room fell into a stunned silence. The maid felt her breath catch. She had expected him to defend the girl. She never expected him to defend her. The older woman glared at both of them. This will backfire. You are making a mistake. The maid's heart pounded. The tension in the room was sharp enough to cut. But the CEO only replied with quiet certainty. I will not apologize for protecting my daughter. He turned to the maid. Please take her to the garden. Somewhere peaceful. I will handle this. The maid gently lifted the child into her arms, feeling the tiny hands cling to her shirt. As they stepped out into the hall, the girl rested her cheek against the maid's shoulder, trembling softly. The maid whispered, You are safe. I am right here. But inside her chest, her own heart trembled too. Because for the first time, she realized she was no longer just helping a child heal. She had become a target in a battle she never meant to step into. The maid carried the trembling child into the garden, letting the sunlight and fresh air soften the leftover tension from the confrontation. The girl clung to her tightly, her small fingers gripping the maid's collar as if letting go would make the world collapse again. They sat on a stone bench beneath a tall maple tree. The garden was quiet, except for the soft rustle of leaves and a distant fountain. Slowly, the child's breathing settled into a shallow but steady rhythm. Her tapping returned, weak at first, then more certain. The maid whispered, You did so well. You held on. I am very proud of you. The girl lifted the ribbon bracelet from the maid's apron pocket and wrapped it around her own wrist. A grounding anchor. Her anchor. When footsteps approached, the girl tensed, but the maid gently rubbed her back. It is all right. It is him. The CEO stepped into view, his expression a mixture of frustration, exhaustion, and something deeper, determination. He sat a respectful distance away, lowering himself slowly so he would not startle his daughter. She is calmer, he said quietly. Yes, the maid replied. She just needed consistency again. He nodded, pressing his hands together. I should have stopped them before it escalated. You protected her, the maid said. That is what matters. The CEO exhaled, but his voice carried weight. They are not finished. They will keep questioning your involvement. They will keep trying to push you out. The maid looked down at the child curled against her. If my presence harms her standing in the family, maybe I should. Do not say that, he interrupted quickly. You are not harming anything. You are helping her. More than anyone else has. The maid hesitated. I just do not want to be the reason she loses stability. He shook his head. You are the reason she has stability. Before she could respond, the child shifted. She slid off the bench and walked to the small patch of sunlight on the pavement. Her steps were uneven, but intentional. She lifted her arms slightly, the way she had that night in the ballroom. The maid froze. The girl was inviting the moment. The CEO watched, breath catching in his throat. The maid stepped forward slowly, letting the girl lead. The child took the maid's hand and placed it against her own cheek, an act of trust so rare that the CEO's eyes widened. Then, gently, the girl tugged the maid's hand upward. A request. A familiar, silent phrase. The maid whispered, You want to dance? The girl nodded, barely moving her head, but enough for both of them to understand. So the maid held her hands and began a slow, simple sway. No music played, but the garden felt full of a rhythm only the two of them could hear. What neither of them saw was the CEO rising to his feet, stunned. His hand came to rest over his heart as he watched his daughter move. Not with fear, not with uncertainty, but with intention. With trust. She never initiates, he whispered. Not like this. The maid smiled softly. She is saying she feels safe. The girl spun once, her movement small but full of effort, and when she stopped, she placed the ribbon bracelet into the maid's hand before gently tapping the CEO's knee. The man froze. The child wanted him to join. The maid nodded to him. Go. She is asking for you. He stepped closer, more carefully than he had ever walked in his life. He reached down, offering his hands the same way the maid had done earlier. Open, gentle, patient. The girl took them. For a few precious seconds, the three of them swayed together in the sunlight. An imperfect, quiet dance that carried more meaning than any gala, any family ceremony, any carefully choreographed moment the mansion had ever seen. When the girl let go, she pressed her head against her father's chest. He lowered his face into her hair, swallowing emotion he was no longer strong enough to hide. She is coming back, he whispered, piece by piece. The maid looked at them, feeling a warmth rise in her chest, a mixture of relief and something she did not dare name. The CEO lifted his gaze to her, his voice thick with gratitude. You gave this to her, he said. You brought her back to me. The maid shook her head gently. She found her way. I only stayed with her. He took a breath. I want you to stay, no matter what anyone says, no matter who challenges it. You are part of her healing now. And for the first time since she arrived at the mansion, the maid let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she was part of something bigger than a job, something that mattered, something that healed. The following week unfolded with a calmness the mansion had not known in a long time. The girl woke each morning with steadier breathing and a quiet anticipation in her eyes. She reached for her bracelet, checked the familiar arrangement of toys, and tapped her greeting pattern the moment the maid entered the room. The maid answered with the same gentle rhythm every time. For taps back. A language of trust they had built together. The CEO joined them more often now, sitting cross-legged on the rug, practicing the routines the maid wrote down for him. He learned how to match his daughter's pace, how to recognize her signals, how to give her space without stepping away emotionally. And each day, the girl responded a little more. One afternoon, as they were finishing a set of drawing exercises, the girl placed a new picture in the maid's hand. It was simple, just 3 stick figures forming a circle, but the meaning was unmistakable. The maid felt her breath catch. Is this us? The child tapped once. A clear yes. The CEO leaned in, his voice warm. She draws family like that. The maid blinked, touched in a way she struggled to put into words. But before she could speak, the girl reached into her small pocket and pulled out the ribbon bracelet. She gently wrapped it around the maid's wrist, tying it with careful, deliberate fingers. The CEO watched with quiet awe. She is giving it to you. That is her way of saying you belong here. The maid swallowed softly. Are you sure? She has never shared it with anyone, he said. Until you. The child took her father's hand next and placed it on top of the maid's, completing the circle from the drawing. For a moment, all three of them stayed like that, a small, silent promise forming between them. As evening light poured through the windows, the CEO walked the maid to the hallway while the little girl rested with her toys. He spoke gently, not with authority this time, but with sincerity. I know this house can be difficult. I know the pressure can be heavier than it should be. But you have brought peace into a place that desperately needed it. She lowered her gaze. I only wanted to help her feel understood. And she does, he said. Because of you. He exhaled slowly, searching for the right words. I cannot change what the rest of the family thinks. But I can choose what is best for her. And what is best is keeping the one person she trusts most. The maid felt warmth rise in her chest. Soft and steady. I will stay. As long as she needs me. He nodded, relieved. Then we will keep building this routine together. At that moment, the girl peeked out from the doorway, tapping gently on the frame. The maid smiled and tapped back, and the CEO followed with his own quiet rhythm. 3 people, 3 rhythms, slowly becoming one. As the day faded and the mansion settled into silence, the little girl curled into her bed, the maid sitting beside her until she fell asleep. The child's hand remained loosely wrapped around the ribbon bracelet, the same one she had shared earlier. And for the first time in a long time, the house did not feel cold. It felt like healing. It felt like home. A home rebuilt not by wealth, not by status, but by kindness, patience, and a bond that had formed in the most unexpected way. A bond that would continue to grow, one quiet, beautiful moment at a time. Thank you for watching this story. If you would like to hear more healing and emotional stories like this, remember to subscribe and stay connected with our channel.